Okay, so I'm just going to refresh this to make sure we are actually live, and we are live. Okay, so welcome to another special live broadcast of Track Talk. Today I am joined by OTDE, who,
Hello.
hey, how you doing?
Doing
Who
well.
we all will remember from his production Dangerous Cargo.
Yep.
So, one of the things I saw whilst scrolling through the description of this track was you said, I believe, a line rounded track long in the making, despite my goal to have this a fast one. So I wonder if you could tell me a bit more about the history of this track. Was this quite a long ongoing project for you?
Uh, so when I make line rider tracks, it's usually like I usually make them in like spurts of creativity, like whenever I feel like it. Um, Whenever I like feel like there's a need for me to finish it. If there's like a limited period of time, I'll usually push and get it done over a certain period of time. Um, and there was a lot of intentionality behind it. There was a lot of like, uh, I want this to be a track that's relatively low execution, but high concept. And uh, I started it, I think, late my sophomore year of college, and I thought like during winter break. And I was like, I'm going to finish this in 5 days. I did not finish it in 5 days. It took me a long time, actually. Mostly between spurts of me like not wanting to really involve myself with line rider period for a while, not really feeling like I was enjoying the act of making line rider, and so there would be long periods of me not doing a lot, and then I would add a little bit, then I would not do a lot for a long period of time, and then finally I was like, I just need to finish this. I just need to have it all done. There was a lot of trepidation about parts of the track that were tough to make, not necessarily like not execution wise, but like in terms of how am I going to convey this concept. And I think that shows in the final product. I think a lot of stuff I've done was conveyed imperfectly, and I mostly attribute that to not really having seen there weren't a lot of or really any examples of a lot of the things I was trying to do in line rider already. So I kind of had to pave a bunch of new ground to make what I wanted to make there. And that can necessarily create some pretty flawed work, even if it even if it breaks ground, it's gonna have a lot of imperfections in the execution.
Okay, yeah, because that leads on. You mentioned like imperfection and flaws. That kind of leads on to another question I had, which was I think I commented this when I first saw the track. It kind of made me feel like I was being given something back in class to like deconstruct and like kind of like
Hmm.
break down. So I guess would you say you didn't mean for it to be kind of like so open to interpretation? Like there was a
Yeah, I think there was a lot that I left open to interpretation for sure. Something I personally don't particularly enjoy, uh, at least when it's highly prevalent in media in general, is the idea of like a puzzle box plot. The idea that it's not necessarily like the plot is obscured and isn't comprehensible, and as a substitute for having a coherent plot, the piece of work will put in a bunch of clues as to what the plot might be. And so it becomes about figuring out the plot and feeling about how smart you are for like
yeah
figuring out the plot. It's like is people have these discussions in circles about like Inception or something like that,
yeah
where it's like, what does it mean? What does it mean? And uh no, I wanted it to be clear, but I didn't really know how to convey it, I think, wordlessly or directly. Like there are things that I definitely could have done to make what I was doing more clear. Uh, I mean, I don't regret making it the way I made it, because now I'm able to take that with me and I'm able to channel that into making stuff that's more precise, that has clearer narratives. Um, but no, I did not set out to make it open to interpretation. Uh, though I made some details intentionally vague because I didn't want certain uh, elements to be necessarily explicit. I guess.
Yeah,
Uh,
like you had a kind of element of show don't tell kind of thing, but not to the point of
yeah.
inscrutability.
Yes. I wanted to. I definitely wanted to do a lot more showing than telling, but it can often be difficult. Like, there's a lot of noise in the translation from the idea in my head to the idea in the audience's head, and so there was enough noise that it kind of obscured the plot for a lot of people, which is understandable.
Yeah, totally. But it really was a very unique track. I don't think I've seen anything quite like that before, actually. I mean, maybe you have one or two examples, but uh,
Uh, I don't, because there aren't.
yeah, there you go.
I had to do a lot of stuff where it's like, is there precedence for this? Can I like look at another like,
Mm,
there are parts where I was like, can I look at another line writer track and like see some clear examples of this? And the answer for most of the track is no.
mm. So that kind of leads on to the next question, which was what inspired this track? 'Cause I guess you've said maybe maybe a few other line ridery things, but in general not.
Yeah, okay, so this is gonna answer a lot of the questions you have set out for me here.
That's fine. It doesn't matter how we work through them.
Uh this this track, a lot of the tracks I have inspirations for, or the way the tracks are inspired, is usually through music. Um, I think oftentimes that I personally view line writer tracks as like this conversation between um, Bosch and the environment, but also between the environment and the music. There's a lot of different conversations going on there, and so when I hear a piece of music, I will get an idea and I will think, this is how I would communicate the idea that I'm hearing in the music through the environment of Line Rider.
Right.
In this case, I was listening to the album that the three songs that I use in Dangerous Cargo come from, Splendor and Misery, and a lot of things sort of stuck out to me. Um, First was the opening felt really desolate, and I think that works really, really well with, I think, notions of something a lot of people don't consider, is that Bosch is, in the vast majority of tracks, Dance of the Line Riders aside, Bosch is entirely alone.
True.
Uh,
Yes.
Bosch is alone in a world, and the desolation of like being in an isolated and contained space in space uh, feels like, to me, sort of this like microcosm for what Bosch would feel if Bosch were a person and was thinking about every single experience and memory that Bosch had uh, in every other track. In every single comment to every single one of those experiences is that Bosch is alone and that Bosch is navigating a world that they don't understand.
Huh. Yeah, that's true, and especially if you just consider just percentages of how much environment there is compared to blank space, it's almost, as you say, it's very desolate and mostly barren.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's
And
actually very interesting. Go on.
so for me, it's like that song conveyed to me a sort of like haunting loneliness that I think is almost inherent in the nature of line writer itself, but like isn't ever conveyed. I think a lot of times the thrust of most tracks is not on the nature of the environment itself. It's often look at the funky way it's being navigated through. Look at the way this motion is happening. Look at the way look at how pretty this thing looks, right? Is there's a lot of focus on the impressiveness, but not on like the not on the nature itself of the medium, the world, the blank slate, because it's mostly this sort of endless white void. And I wanted to highlight that in the opening for sure. And then when I got to the second song, it was this sort of like powerful escape theme, and is really easy to see in your mind Bosch weaving and like winding their way through a bunch of different halls. And so the idea just came to me like that. It was like, okay, Bosch is escaping, now what? I hear the static and I immediately think, okay, Bosch has run into something and is being crushed, is being hurt. And I hear a little choir hit in the middle of that, and I think that's some kind of reassembly going on there. And then I hit True Believer in the album at one point, and it's just that end part of True Believer is this just it's a hopeful ending, I think, for a song, but it's done in such a like robotic and like alien voice that it like it's as othered as Bosch is. And so when I paired all those three together, I had an idea for like three different parts that I wanted to do. I wanted to do an opening with the first song, I wanted to do the escape with the second song, and I wanted to have the emptiness with the third. So that's how that all came together.
Huh. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I guess like the track definitely conveys, that's something about Line Rider needs to change. But I had never really considered that it was really about the nature of Line Rider itself. No matter what kind of track you make, that's interesting. So I guess that kind of explains some of the other questions I have. Like, we got to get out of here. So you want to so what do you like hope to gain from this track, would you say?
Well, I think when I wrote that "We Got to Get Out of Here" was definitely just a lot of the theming I've done around text and titles and stuff since then. Dangerous Cargo was like something I wanted to set a precedent with. Something I wanted to set like, this is how future tracks are going to look. This is how they're going to be formatted. Sort of signaling an artistic shift in the direction of the channel. And you see that in newer tracks like Shortcuts.
Yeah.
I will have the title of the track. It will be a line writer and then something, right? And then it'll have a short phrase. It's "We Got to Get Out of Here" for a line writer space opera, Dangerous Cargo. But for the line writer triptych, it's "From Whence We Came." And so these are not phrases that I created necessarily to convey some idea of my own, like, this is what I believe this track is about, so much as I think they're thoughts related to the composition of the track that are, I think they're little phrases I just want people to hang on when they're watching the track.
Okay, yeah.
Things that sort of imbue they imbue the sled with a sense of motivation.
Yeah.
with we got to get out of here, it's like it becomes clear that the motive is escape. With from whence we came, it's clear that the motive is going home. With every single one of these, there's a sort of there's an underlying purpose in the track, and it outlines the motivation of Bosch.
Okay. So one question that has occurred to me now that the theme and everything is a little more clear. Did you ever consider using the edge of the map as like part of your track? Because you know the kind of wacky effects and the kind of vibrations and kind of pressure that kind of get put on Bosch as he gets further, or well, as Bosch gets further and further towards the edge, and the floating points start to cause more and more errors.
Yes. In terms of using that for like grinding or like causing pain to Bosch, I definitely thought about it, but for me, I don't want it to feel so much as Bosch is being disintegrated as much as Bosch is being like thrown around. Like at this point, Bosch has been separated from their sled and they're just put through the grinder, basically.
Okay, yeah.
For me, the sort of floating point shakiness implies a kind of disintegration that I didn't want to reflect as an action on Bosch.
Yeah, fair enough. So maybe we could talk a little about the more specific aspects of the scenery. So we talked
Yeah.
about how you wanted to tie the theme of escape and loneliness with a spaceship, out in the middle of space,
Mm-hmm.
drifting through the stars, etc. But what about some of the very specific scenery? Like, for lack of a better word, I called the square one you drew kind of looks like a circuit board. Could you
Yeah.
elaborate on what's going on in that little scene?
So, I came up with little names. I do this whenever I do scenery. Whenever I'm doing things that are repeated, multiples, or are like important figures in the scenery, I will give them names of some kind. Sometimes I'll give them like a species name. Like in the gorge, the little sort of noodly shaped things were literally just noodles. So I'm like, I'm gonna make some noodles. I'm gonna make some grass here. And they were meant to denote like specific types of things. For this piece, my intention was to have sort of specific characters, and specific sections of a ship, right? And I guess the circuit board thing wasn't fully conveyed perfectly. It was like a tight space. Basically, think of it this way: there's like a 2D tunnel for many parts of this, right?
Yeah.
We're switching that into 3D, and it's like an exploded view this way.
Okay.
So it's like facing forward and backward through the plane rather than across it.
So
And
you're
so,
trying to show more dimensions, you're saying?
yes. And not just that, but like the idea that I think Bosch is being caused pain by the machine as well. And so I wanted to create a sense of like hostile architecture, basically. Stuff
Right.
that is it presents some kind of danger to Bosch rather than curving away under every part of him. Something I wanted to convey in the first part, or not the first part, the escape, was that not only were there like multiple paths that could be taken, but that each part didn't specifically look like it was carved out for Bosch. Like these were things that existed before Bosch came there.
Okay. Yeah.
And the idea is that once that crash happens, where you see like the exploded view of things, Bosch is essentially a sled, and it can no longer essentially move within the architecture the way they were previously. something has gone wrong. There's been a crash.
Hmm.
So that's how I would describe the circuit board.
Okay. So pretty soon after this, we have the encounter with the face, which is like, is that a what's it remind me of? It's not that picture of the Adonis face, is it? Or am I thinking of something else?
No, it's I love vaporwave, but it's not that. I think you're thinking about Andros from Star Fox.
No, I'm thinking about Greek mythology, I think. But what what I see, I guess, when I see that face, is it kind of, now that you've sort of spoken more about your theme, is that like Bosch being looked upon by the creator, or is that some kind of self-reflection, or what would you describe the face as?
So this one's a little cheeky, actually. It's so a couple things. I want to talk about the process of making the face, number one, and then I'll get into sort of thematic details here. So, if you can believe it, the face itself is traced, though not in a traditional way. Essentially, what I did is I pulled up Power Menu, made my window transparent, and I used LRA's click to make a dot feature, and I took an image of a face looking down like this, and then I put dots on notable featured areas of the face, and then I connected those with lines. And so what you get is this sort of abstracted
Mesh.
polygonal
Yeah.
version of the face. The only part I don't polygonalize is the eyes, because I thought that was important to like preserve as is, and it makes them feel distinct for me, at least.
Yeah.
A little bit of trial and error doing that, but was able to put that together in about, I think, an hour, 2 hours maybe. But as for what it means, I never thought I would actually explain this one to people.
Well, it's like the most iconic part of the track. Like, it looks literally like, when you see it, it's like the face of God looking down on someone when they're dead. Like, that's what it like. That's the first thing that springs to mind when you see it, at least for me.
Funny you should mention that. So the entire time I was building this character, I referred to them as the God in the machine. The idea that there is a sentient force alive inside the ship that is interested in keeping Bosch alive and together. And so you'll notice that Bosch is off sled, taken apart by various bits in the machine after crashing. Then when that choir hits, it's meant to imply the divine.
Mm.
And we see the God in the machine. The reason this is cheeky is because Latin for God in the machine is Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah.
And when the God in the machine appears, Bosch is put back together. Bosch is reassembled. And so Bosch is saved by the God in the machine and then is spit out into space. And that's where we find ourselves at the credits. So the God in the machine was an important part, and sort of meant to hint at the idea that I think early on in the crash, Bosch has resigned themselves to get hit around, because there's not much else you can do at that point. And the God in the machine there is there to convey that, no, you're not quite done yet. There's more of there are more places in the blank slate for you to see.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess with your ending, would you say that Bosch has kind of escaped the desolate world, because he's still drifting through space at the end? Or has he just been
Oh,
sent back inside the game again to do more of the machine's bidding?
uh, Bosch is released from a literal machine. Um, my intention was to follow this up with a track where Bosch is essentially outside the game space and is exploring
Mm.
beyond the constraints of Line Rider. But the implication I'm going for there is definitely that the whole series and sets of like chains and restraints on Bosch have not been lifted, but one of them has. The very literal one. In a sense, Bosch is never really free from constraint. We, as creators, make sure of that, but you know, you've Bosch has gotten out of there.
Okay. So, looking back on this track, I mean, you said there were certainly some things you felt that you hadn't conveyed to maybe as the standard that you'd liked, or that there were flaws. So, looking back on it now, what would you change if you could?
I would say I would not change anything, because I think it works as a piece on its own, and I think that the lessons it's taught me for making future things are more important than the idea of releasing a perfect product. I will say, um, I wish that when making it, I had put more thought into directly conveying the idea of like Bosch is imprisoned here in this part, uh, to more strongly like suggest the idea that escape is something that Bosch themselves is motivated to do. Um, I would sections of
Oh, we seem to be losing OTDE here. Um, hopefully, we'll get him back in a second. OTDE, if you can hear this, you currently sound like a robot.
what here?
Oh, you're starting to come back a little.
More. Let's disconnect.
Um, 1 second. So he should rejoin in a second, and hopefully all will be fixed. Just bear with us, folks. Hey, JC, I see you there in the chat.
Computer.
Oh, hey, I think we're back.
Your webcam says otherwise.
You still sound kind of tinny, but I can hear you.
It's taking you a second.
Yeah, you're starting to come back into recognizable dialect.
Oh, there.
Um,
All right, I'm back.
yeah, your video doesn't seem to be showing though, so you might just want to click that on and then off again. Ha, yeah, I see. Yep, that seems to be doing something. Yeah, I see
There we go.
I see JC down in the chat. Yes, this is exactly the same thing that happened to us earlier. Unfortunately, Discord, even as Skype does, throws its little tantrums every now and then.
I'm gonna try and record this one. Might.
Oh man, that is full on robot.
How about now?
It just sounds like a complete computer voice.
Yikes.
It sounds like you're like auto-tuned or something. I think the okay, keep bearing with us, folks. Hey,
here's Johnny.
there we go. That always seems to work for some reason.
All right, cool.
Okay, people. So we apologize for these technical issues, but these things do happen. So, sometime before we ended, I believe we were discussing things that you might change, and you had just begun to say that it was a learning process for you, etc. And that
it's. I'm gonna say that it's like there are things I would want to convey, but I have future tracks to do that with. I think there's more ways to play with narrative than the amount that we've seen as a sum total, which has been little to none. Narrative exploration has been a big fat zero, and I've been trying to find ways to change that myself, and do narratives that are cohesive, that are interesting, that are engaging, that feel like, I don't know, something your gran would sit down and tell you, or something like that. Like, here is a story. It just happens to involve a little penguin person on a sled, right? It's just,
well, yeah. I mean, that is something that Line Rider tends to forget. Like, it's almost like we play and we take a lot of things for granted. Like when I made what the hell did I call it? Seventh Heaven. That kind of crappy scenery track. Like, one of the things I wanted to do was actually have Bosch do kind of what it looks like he's supposed to do. Like go sledding, which is
I think it's one of the questions I got after I released this was, why didn't you use more manuals? to to which I said, uh, why would Bosch be doing a manual?
Yeah.
Like, what purpose does it serve for the narrative?
Yeah, like in the
Uh,
context of what you were making, it doesn't make any sense at all.
there's no reason Bosch would decide to do some tricks, because that's what they are. We've constructed these tricks, and we've decided, like, here's how we fit them into the broader scope. And I didn't want to look at it as like, how do I fit these tricks into my narrative here? Or how do I fit the narrative into these tricks? Is like, do I need these tricks in the narrative?
Yeah.
And every time I asked myself that, the question would usually come up and the answer would immediately be no. It would be like, how do I want to convey this feeling? For part one, it's like this high speed chase through like maze like corridors. And then the second part, in the middle, I wanted Bosch to feel like constrained in that sort of like tube maze, right? And these are not like things that tricks are necessarily the best at being predisposed to convey. I think there's a like the tricks are usually, their goal is to convey like, I am doing an impressive thing, not Bosch is feeling cramped here. Bosch is pressed against something. Bosch is like pressured. Bosch is free. Bosch is flying. That kind of thing, right? It's a detachment from the idea of what Bosch is. What Bosch is doing, and more like what Bosch is like feeling through that. There's a concept that comics artist Scott McCloud uses when referring to the level of detail and realism in certain things. Specifically, when referring to how cartoony something looks, he refers to it as like iconization. Like getting closer and closer to the icon of something, what it essentially would be. As simple as it gets until you get to some kind of essence with a little bit of variation, right?
Okay, yeah.
So like the essence of a car is like more and more cartoony, like more abstracted away from what a car actually is and more into the idea of what we think about when we imagine a car, right? And one of the things that Scott McCloud argues is that characters in books, comics, that kind of thing are iconized as a way of helping us relate to them, right? Like the less it looks like a specific person, the more we see ourselves in that person, the more features that we can identify and fill ourselves into their roles,
I
right?
see.
And so Bosch is a very iconized character, and I think a lot of people, when they first like make Line Rider, their experience is like, wow, Bosch is like doing all these wild things. Imagine if you were sledding down this kind of thing, right? That's the early conversation you would have in your early encounters with Line Rider, or at least I did when I was like 9. Good God. Uh, but the iconization was lost after a while, I think. There was this distance. I think there's a distance that still many creators put between themselves and Bosch, who is the subject of their work, that I don't necessarily think is useful or conducive for making interesting tracks. I want to like close that distance, be like, what would it feel like to do this? What would it feel like to be here, right? And convey different things: awe, adrenaline, contemplation. These are like very, very human things, and they're things that are common to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think those are things that are worth exploring in Line Rider, even if it's a little like I think there's a disconnect because people see a lot of weird shit that's being done to Bosch, and they're like, okay, this has gone out of the realm of possibility and has gone into like strange dance mode. And so for a lot of
Hmm.
people, it becomes less I am feeling and identifying with the experiences that Bosch is doing, and more like, oh wow, look at that strange dance that ragdoll is doing.
Yeah.
And so you end up with stuff that can feel kind of disconnected uh, from a lot of people. And yeah, I I guess I would just say that I'm not about that.
Okay. Yeah. So you want a kind of like a catharsis um, that people feel when they watch the track, when they see Bosch. You want them to kind of identify with the character, so to speak,
Not even identify, but like I
or
think I
like
want people
resonate.
to yeah, I want people to recognize something of what Bosch is doing in the from their own experiences and connect with it that way.
Yeah.
I think This Will Destroy You does a great job of that. You can go into the comments and you can
Oh
see
yeah.
everyone has their own like little take on it, right? Like it's weird. There's so many hot takes on like this makes me think about the nature of human existence, and like
Yeah.
it's you don't have to do much to be clear here. You don't have to write this like spinning, beautiful, like storybook tale that's full of like lush illustrations. In fact, I think if you get too detailed with any kind of scenery, it can kind of distract from the point. But if you do it well, detailed scenery can work as well. But uh, there, I think there needs to be a fostered sense of connection with the work that you're doing in a way that's not like gamey, I guess. Like it's not like a video game where there are these things you can do, and Bosch is essentially your demonstrator. It's your way of saying I can do this, 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 and this, right? And I can arrange these in this particular way, and I can have them go with the beat in this particular way.
Yep.
Uh, that's uh, for me, in my view, at least, that's kind of missing the point.
It
And the
can.
point's going to be
Yeah.
point's going to be
If I could
yeah.
jump in there on that one because I can kind of relate to that myself. I think I've said this probably in the last three interviews that I've kind of got to a point in my track making where I kind of feel like at times I'm too reliant or overly reliant on the music to kind of direct the track. And like after a while, it can kind of feel like what you've been talking about people being disconnected from Line Rider. It's very easy to just see Line Rider as a bunch of contact points or as a non entity that just moves to your whims. So I can definitely kind of see your point in a way.
So how do you position yourself when you've been alienated from Line Rider like that? What you do uh, is you foster that connection again. You think, why am I choreographing this? Why is this choreography important to me? Because that's what a lot of stuff that doesn't have like scenery is when it's not like scenery is very much like set dressing, right? Uh, and it's like it's world building and it's something where you want to create sort of this believable environment for Bosch. It doesn't always have to be that way. Sometimes it can just enhance what you're doing. Uh, I think uh, a lot of Andrew Hess's work is really well done towards that end, using scenery to sort of enhance like visual impact.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, for me, what's important is nailing down the why immediately. Dangerous Cargo, I didn't execute it perfectly, but I had a why. I
Yep.
knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to have this escape scene. I wanted there to be this opening scene where just you could see this incredible loneliness, this incredible like desolation in it. And at the end, I I wanted there to be like this sort of cautious hope, and like they're like things you want to convey. I think when we use the phrase like narrative and line writer often, collectively as people who make line writer tracks, too often we use that to mean like there needs to be a story, like Bosch did this, then Bosch did that, right? And then Bosch like had the motivation to quit their 9 to 5 job and go skiing in the mountains or something like that. It's not always.
The American dream, eh?
Oh, I, skiing, snowboarding in my case terrifies me, but uh, yeah, my point is there's like so often the motivation is do this thing either because it's hard to do, or because it will impress people when arranged in this way.
Yeah.
And that can be satisfying sometimes, but in terms of making artistic work that you're like happy with, I think that can be a real hindrance.
Yeah, for sure. And
It's
I think we're kind of starting to spill over into more of more general stuff that maybe we should save for the other show.
all right.
So unless you have anything else you'd like to say about this track, I think we'll probably end here and start the next
Yeah.
broadcast.
So Dangerous Cargo. It's it's gonna have a sequel. It's probably not happening. There's probably going to be some metafiction at some point here.
Live action
But
Bosch.
between Bosch, the slate, the lines, the creators, a metafiction involving all of those. But until I have the means to execute it in a way that I will find both literarily and existentially satisfying, I'm going to hold off on that one.
Okay, so it's up your sleeve for the moment.
Yes.
So, and with that, we will conclude this live episode of Track Talk. Join us in a few minutes, or probably just 30 seconds for the next broadcast, or we will go behind the lines with OTDE. Thanks, and bye.